Welcome back to the Space Salvi Institute podcast. I'm Andrew Petiprin.
And I'm Bobby Mixa.
And today, Bobby, we are going to talk about Christopher Nolan's 13th feature film, The Odyssey. I think that the hot takes have cooled off a little bit, although they are persisting somewhat. So maybe they're still the temperature is still a little bit warm, and there will therefore be a bit of an audience that is still eager to consume what we have to offer. But we wanted to wait a little bit. For one reason, I didn't get to the cinema right away. I know that you got there pretty early on, and I also had a few issues that got in the way of my recording this with you today. So here we are, a week plus or thereabouts since Christopher Nolan's film The Odyssey came out. We're going to discuss it today on a number of different levels. The Odyssey is obviously not only one of the most important stories in Western civilization, but in some respects, it's kind of the Ur story. It has a kind of shape to it that has given rise to many, if not most, of the great stories that we tell in the West, namely the story of leaving home, being transformed, and then coming back. That's a very kind of simple kind of distillation, I suppose, of what the Odyssey is about. And I guess that's the big spoiler for everybody. If anybody's worried about spoiler alerts, Bobby, the Odyssey is the story of a man who goes to war and takes a long time getting home. So if you didn't want us to spoil the movie, I'm sorry, I've just done it. But if you don't want us to kind of spoil the impressions that you may have from certain scenes in the film or something like that, then perhaps you'll want to press pause and go and watch it and come back to us after you have sat through the experience. But for everybody else, I think we're safe to proceed. Now, Christopher Nolan had a huge task ahead of him, no matter what. And obviously, the reactions to this film have been very hot and very cold. People have been passionately enthusiastic about it, and other people have really hated it. I think that's been the case much more so than any of Christopher Nolan's other films. Most of the rest of his movies have been very well received. This one had a lot of anticipation leading up to it. There was a lot of prejudice, I believe, actually leading up to it, just in terms of the kinds of impressions people thought they would prove true when they watched the movie. They may have proved true, they may have not. We'll talk about some of those things. But Nolan's task was so much bigger because, of course, not only is he kind of trying to adapt this original story, this sort of like ancient story that has given rise to all the stories in Western civilization. So that's very difficult. But also, we're so far removed from it that the world of the gods, the relationship between men and the gods that existed in Homer's time, has fundamentally changed. It changed because of the incarnation and resurrection of Jesus, but it's also obviously fundamentally changed much more now that we're living in a sense, a kind of post-Christian age. So we're kind of two enormous steps removed from the kind of pagan cosmology that Homer is working in. So let me throw it to you by reminding our audience of the fact that you recently wrote an article and you posted it to our site called Holy Homer. And you talk about the patristic reception of Homer's Odyssey, and in particular, the way that a 20th century church historian named Hugo Rahner reminded the church and the world of this phenomenon of, namely what the early church and what Christians had kind of always thought about Homer. So let me throw it back to you because we want to get our heads a little bit around what the kind of cosmology was that Homer was working in. But in some respects, even more importantly, we want to understand the kind of Christian world that once existed and now doesn't, that a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan is going to have to navigate. Like any real artist worth his salt nowadays is going to be working in this space of there once was a Christian West and now there isn't, but what does that mean for the future?
Mhm.
So all of these, I think, are kind of obstacles and opportunities that Christopher Nolan is dealing with in his 13th feature film, The Odyssey. So, Bobby, take it away. What do you think
Yeah.
about all that?
Well, yeah, in anticipation of the film, I was reading through my good friend Kevin Diamond and I were reading through the Odyssey. But in addition to that, I always like to kind of have like a little commentary on what I'm reading. A book that I read years ago that I picked up again called Hugo. It's by Hugo Rahner, not Karl Rahner, but his elder brother, who was also a Jesuit. And, some of our listeners might be interested that Pope Benedict said the better of the Rahner brothers. But this patristic scholar, Hugo Rahner, wrote a book called Pagan Myths and Christian Mystery. And I believe he wrote it in the 1930s. It's one of the best books. It's one of my, like, I think in the top 10 list of books. It's one of the best. At the heart of it is really, I mean, it's Clement of Alexandria's little phrase about the seed, about the logos spermaticoi, about the seeds of the word, and then, with all being kind of then collected into the logos itself. But anyways, the third part of that book, I believe, is just called Holy Homer. So I wrote the article with the title Holy Homer in reference to Hugo Rahner's book. But Rahner is also referencing a title that many of the early church fathers gave to Homer. So think of the early church fathers, like the early Greek church fathers, who were all educated in the Greek mythology. I mean, Homer was known, as Plato called him, as the educator, the educator of Hellas, the educator of Greece. And it's just not the kind of mythology, but the kind of lessons, educational lessons, which, for them was like an education in the robust sense of the term, which was an education, like a deep vision of reality. And a formative text. So for them, it was really, if you want to say, a kind of a spiritual guide. But what Rahner lays out is that there's a tension there. Like all the kind of reception of pagan culture, the Greek fathers, church fathers really struggled with how to kind of take this in. And I mentioned Saint Clement of Alexandria, who might be a little bit more liberal in that approach, taking in a lot from the Egyptians. But then also you have some others who are a little bit more skeptical, and that actually might be a little bit in the West. But nevertheless, all those who were very skeptical of what to take in, um, and may have a little bit more of a puritanical approach, they all still had reverence for Homer. Now, last thing I just want to mention is that Plato himself, who, Hugo Rahner really emphasizes that Plato, I mean, you can't understand Plato without understanding what Homer lays out. As you said, Andrew, this is the text, and all of our imaginations are shaped by this.
Hmm.
Um, I can't tell you when you read this thing, though. It's like something written like, or about a story like 3,000 years ago. Still resonates more than anything that is like written in the past year. I mean, I think of that Chesterton line that um what was it like what was that line about today's newspaper is or something about the Greek myths are like fresher today than today's newspaper.
Hmm.
Something, it's not about Greek myths, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Anyways, when you read Plato though, Plato does also like reject a lot in Homer. He says he has a false theology. Okay.
Hmm.
But it's interesting though too at the same time when you read the kind of commentary tradition on this is Homer himself is even in a way moving away from what may be labeled as a false theology.
Hmm.
What you see in the movement from the Iliad to the Odyssey. But anyways, leaving that aside for a second. So even the Greeks, the pagan Greeks themselves, the philosophers, they still kind of had this mode of like reception, taking in a lot, but also rejecting some things.
Hmm.
Um, so Hugo Rahner's book, though, he focuses on different scenes, and I don't want to get into that, but like the sections that I focused on were mainly the section on the sirens and the interpretive tradition of the sirens, which I think, and we can get into this,
Yeah,
Andrew.
explain that. Let's start
Yeah.
there. I mean,
Okay.
explain kind of the early Christian understanding of like so let me just interject really quickly and then I want you to explain
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sirens thing. Like so there was a power to that to the narrative of the Iliad and the Odyssey that early
Yeah.
Christians who were trying to make sense, especially in the Greek East,
Mm.
Origin of Alexandria, Justin Martyr, Clement,
Yeah.
Clement, so many of these figures, they have to figure out a synthesis. They have to because there's a kind of power to the
Yeah.
theology and to the storytelling, right?
Mm.
Um, I mean, so much so that there develops this kind of mythology of somehow, you know, um, Homer and Moses had some kind of, connection in their storytelling, that kind of thing, right? Like
Yeah.
that there's like something about the ancient Greek understanding of man and God and the gods and the Hebrews, as well. And like, I think, I mean, Plato, my professor for Plato and Aristotle at Yale, John Hare, I mean, he firmly believed both Plato and Aristotle were monotheists. I mean, so like that's the kind of understanding that you have
Yeah.
to have for them. And anyway, that's kind of a separate thing, but maybe that's, somewhere to go eventually when we're thinking about what Homer is doing and then eventually what Christopher Nolan is doing. But so yeah, when the early church is engaging with parts of the Odyssey, for example, like the call of the sirens, it's like reading the Old Testament in the sense that, like, now the Old Testament has a literal meaning that is holy,
Yeah.
according to them.
Yeah.
But more important, by the way, more important to the Greek fathers in particular was the allegorical reading.
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
important than the literal reading. And
Oh,
so of
absolutely.
course,
Yeah.
they're opening Homer and they're like, there's an obvious allegorical reading to this
Yeah.
that points to Christ, that points to the church, right? So
The
tell us about
spirit.
that.
Yeah. Okay, so like, well, let's take that. For example, let's go back into the book of Genesis and what they found there. With I mean, think of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Let's go to the sirens then. The great temptation. I mean, if you look at and Patrick, I encourage everybody to listen to Patrick Deneen on this stuff because he's really good. Um, the temptation for Odysseus, and we don't know if the siren song is the same for everyone, but the real temptation for Odysseus is not the kind of lotus eating. I mean, he's not like into narcotics and all that stuff. He resists that. Even the promise of immortality from Calypso, he rejects that. But it says, and this is what Hugo Rahner makes a lot out of, is that the siren song is, if you listen, and there's only just like it's only like a line in the Odyssey, is about the knowledge of all things, the knowledge of like the past, or I forget the exact line, it's the past, present, and the future, or the things that happened in Troy, the things up above us, below us, up above us and below us. It's that kind of all that total knowledge that is so that's the temptation for Odysseus, which also is a temptation that would lead to his death.
Hmm.
And what happens, and part of that though, is the church fathers are kind of playing with this a little bit, where there's that, and they emphasize that the kind of that knowledge, that gnosis, which then they equate the sirens with the Gnostics, okay, and then also the connection with that with lust, because we tend to think of it as the promised siren song as like these beautiful, what appear to us to be beautiful women. Um, and there's like the sexual kind of like connotations there as well. And um, but we don't see that they have these kind of like bird um the claws of like some hawk and also their victims are all there at their feet, like the kind of the tradition of how we depict some of the sirens as associated with just merely lust is something that Hugo Rahner says came a little later, that came later, but early on it's associated with knowledge. So let's go back to this kind of allegorical reading then too of Genesis. You think with the promise of the serpent, okay, this will open your eyes and you'll know all, I mean, it's knowledge of good and evil. But what's interesting is it's not knowledge that's rejected, but it's this all-encompassing knowledge that is what is going to lead to one's death. And and the similarities there, you can't but
Hmm.
see those things, which in a way, when you read those Gnostics, and I was kind of looking into some of this stuff, and I was like, wow, man, there are so many similarities. The very fact, and this is what Nolan did not include, which I was really upset about. It doesn't end with his father. And if you look at actually like Odysseus figure, okay, obviously Odysseus is flawed man. He's not Christ. Okay. I don't want to equate him, but Odysseus has to go into hell. Okay. Um, into Hades. And he also, the funny thing too, is that he goes into Hades before he meets Calypso. and Patrick Deneen has mentioned this before, is that once he goes into Hades and he knows that's his fate ultimately, he still actually rejects Calypso's offer of immortality.
Hmm.
Um, because Hades back then was not very nice.
Hmm.
Once you, I mean, Nolan depicts this. It doesn't seem like a place you really want to be.
Hmm.
Um, but anyways, this movement to uniting with Penelope, okay, then going ultimately to his father, Laertes. I mean, Laertes not even in the film,
Right.
okay,
Right. Right.
and then this kind of like homecoming to one's fatherland, but then with one's father, and then Zeus declares peace to the whole realm.
Yeah.
Kind of got this sense too that you could see why Gnostics would be like, hey, let's see, Christ ascends to the right hand of the Father, and there's this movement, all the way up. He's like Mary Magdalene maybe is an image of the church, and she first sees, but she doesn't recognize him at first, like, Penelope, and then, he still has to go on his way to the Father. Then there's peace in the realm.
Right. Right.
But anyways, what I'm saying is that all this stuff is there that you could see why if you've got this text in hand with the Bible, they would see these like you said, similarities.
Yeah, and let's come back to the ending, and you're pointing towards some stuff that I think is ultimately maybe going to be the most important thing we talk about today, and kind of what Nolan is finally saying about our world and our culture now
Yeah.
compared to sort of the way people in the West used to think about it. But so just to kind of track back to the ancient the kind of ancient scriptural
Mhm.
interpretive, the kind of ancient scriptural hermeneutics, I guess you could say, especially in the Greek East or in the Alexandrian school. There's the idea, there's the literal and there's the allegorical. And I think that we've sort of touched on we've gone to the most important one for them, which was the allegorical, right?
Yeah.
But in between, there's also what they call the figurative, right? So like
Mhm.
if you read a story in the Old Testament, like if you read the story of Noah's Ark, obviously like the allegorical is ultimately going to be a kind of like salvation tale and all that sort of thing, but like in between, the figurative is, what is the ark? Oh, the ark is actually the church, right?
Yeah.
And the waters of baptism, or whatever, right? And so I think that the early church also read that particular scene that we're discussing, the siren scene, as what is the responsibility of the Christian leader?
Hmm.
He must listen to the sirens so that he knows what their call sounds like,
Yes.
but he must protect himself by lashing himself to the wood, right? To the mast, which
Yes.
is like
Yes. Yeah.
akin to the wood of the cross. And then he orders the people in his care to stuff their ears with wax so that they're completely out of the equation. They trust their leader, they stuff their ears, they row their boat, and they get to safety. And that is this sort of image and this figurative image in between the literal and the allegorical of kind of, the Christian leader leading the flock on the ship of fools, the ship of salvation, past the temptation of knowledge, the temptations of the flesh, all that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So now, is that what Homer intended? No, but it doesn't matter
Yeah.
because I mean, the whole idea of kind of original authorial intent when you're dealing with, a text that has had such a long life and clearly is like, dare we say, even sort of enchanted in some way. I mean, that clearly has a kind of life to it that isn't just a kind of nice story that our ancient ancestors told and like, isn't that sweet, right? I mean, it has a power to it, and there's no doubt about it. And so, of course, a great, filmmaker would want to try and capture that somehow. Um, okay, but let me propose this to you and see what your reaction is. Okay, so maybe for a long time that was that was a kind of, interesting, edifying, I don't know how else to put it. There was a kind of interpretive key to reading the great ancient texts, whether it was Homer or the Aeneid or love poetry of Ovid or like whatever it may be, of understanding even the whole kind of theological worldview. I mean, Saint Augustine can come along and say, well, the ancient gods were real. They're demons, like there's a
Yeah.
kind of like reality that is actually sort of being captured, right? But then here we are with a kind of remnant of the Christian worldview. And in particular, I would say a kind of like ethics that we've inherited from Christianity that most of the world now would rather we keep detached from the law of Christ, right? That there's something sort of good about what Jesus taught that can be boiled down in something like love your neighbor as yourself.
Hmm.
And that's really kind of the important thing. If you kind of get that right, it's pretty imprecise, guys. We're trying our best out here, but like that's what we're aiming for, right? But we want to detach it from kind of the person of Christ, the work of Christ, the kind of exclusive truth claims of the church, all of those kinds of things. And that I think is pretty much the ethics that comes through in Christopher Nolan's Odyssey. Because throughout the movie, to me, the most kind of blaring at us in almost kind of blinking red lights throughout the movie is this whole idea of the law of Zeus.
Hmm.
Um, Odysseus himself lives with a kind of anguish over having violated that law by introducing the Trojan horse into into
Maybe
Troy.
explain what the law of Zeus is.
Okay, well, I mean, well, let me throw it to you to introduce that because
Okay.
let's see if we're on the same page with kind of what this even means. What did you take that to mean, the law of Zeus?
Yeah, well, okay, like this, it's interesting. I took it as basically hospitality of also welcoming the stranger,
Yeah.
which is what Polyphemus, the Cyclops, clearly breaks. And then, with all you mentioned the Trojan horse, which is again, it's a trick, but if you want to say it is a total rejection of the bonds of men which is grounded in the hospitality, the law of Zeus. So that's how I read it. Now, I mean, further, I mean, anytime Odysseus, as Matt Damon, showed up, he just was pretty comfortable that the law of Zeus is going to be honored here. Just assuming that. But then it's all kind of his recall that he's one of the biggest violators of that.
Yeah, I would say, okay, let's build on that. I'll just full disclosure, I had this other interview the other day with a priest named Father Augustine Weta who
Yeah.
wrote a novel called The Eighth Arrow, which is it's quite good. And it proposes that Odysseus is in Dante's hell and is given the opportunity to kind of fight his way out. And it's quite interesting. And it really is a kind of interesting modern interpretation of kind of what would be going on in the mind and heart of a kind of war hero like Odysseus. But Father Augustine Weta sticks more closely to the framework of honor and shame, which would have been the case in the ancient world. Certainly, that's the kind of morality that that Homer is working from. I mean, this is why in the Odyssey, Penelope's charge to Odysseus is return with your shield or on it. Like you go and fight, and you either win or you die. Do not come back here moping around about, don't come back a coward, that kind of thing. Like it was the women in ancient Greece who had this like incredible sense of like kind of honor and shame, right?
Hmm.
That I think is not going to be the case in the Anne Hathaway version of Penelope, and maybe that's okay. Like we don't live in the honor and shame paradigm anymore, so I do understand why Nolan is sort of trying to navigate through that. But I do think it's interesting to try and hold on to the idea of the law of Zeus outside of the honor and shame category, putting it instead into this sort of you know. Gosh, I mean, how would we even frame it? I mean, into this almost sort of like progressive worldview where nothing is ever enough. We're always failing our neighbors in certain ways, which obviously has its origins in the teachings of Christ in some respects.
Yeah.
But I do think, again, detached from all this stuff, like the person and work of Christ, you end up with just this sort of sense of like self-loathing. You end up with a kind of like a whole culture that thinks it's bad, that sort of realizes it's sort of founded on a kind of pack of lies. And
Yeah.
and you get the sense at the end of Nolan's film that that's kind of what he's saying about
We
about
don't get the
this
sense that
civilization.
Odysseus is after glory. I mean, it
Right.
seems like that's the whole thing that he's after.
Yeah.
And like, he doesn't really think, I mean, yeah, Nolan is free to tell the tale that he wants to tell, but it's a
Yeah.
very different Odysseus. Um, but even kind of the stuff too, like this kind of realism that like creeps in, like really it's not Helen's infidelity and whatever caused that, right? That has caused the war. Agamemnon is using that as a pretext for this kind of for getting for
Yeah, it's
the
a trade war. Yeah,
trade war. I
it's
was like,
just your typical
what are we like
human.
in the Straits of Hormuz or something? Like,
Right.
what is like, this kind of like
Exactly.
realism that
Right.
creeps through. Like, this is what it's really about. And I don't want to like go off of this a little bit, but this has just kept kind of pissing me off the more I was
Yeah.
thinking about it. There's like an inability in Nolan, I feel like to like as much as he's going to depict Polyphemus and these other kind of monsters, but once it gets to also this kind of like supernatural realm too, maybe there's more than this. It's always kind of like, nah, that's just like a figment of your imagination.
Okay, let's pick
And
this up because obviously in the movie we are led to believe that there is a kind of divine will or something, right? I mean,
yeah,
the men, the Odysseus's men violate what what Odysseus believes is this real prophecy that if they eat if they eat
the
the
cows,
cattle,
yeah,
that then they will be cursed. When they put out when Odysseus puts out the Cyclops' eye, they are cursed by Neptune because Neptune loves the Cyclops or whatever. So clearly there
yes,
is some sense in which there is there is something happening in the universe
yes,
of,
yeah,
of Nolan's world. However,
he
the
doesn't, yeah,
way that man in that context sort of understands that will is very disconcerting. And that for me was captured in the character of Athena. That throughout the movie you have Zendaya, beautiful woman, certainly worthy of playing Athena, no
Uh,
problem there.
yeah. Can
But
I just say something though?
sure, okay.
I've seen her in a couple roles and her range is not very wide.
Well, that
I,
was the next thing I was going to
okay,
say. I
never
mean, I
mind.
didn't.
Just put that as a side. I got to just sorry for the jab, but
Well, she is. Well, let's come back to the acting performances that
yeah,
we
yeah,
maybe found unsatisfactory. I'm not the biggest fan of Zendaya, as far as her acting chops are concerned. I will say in this film though, I don't think she was really given much acting to do. I
yeah.
mean, she simply stands there making a pouting face at Odysseus as if always sort of again, it's the god who disapproves. It's the god who sort of the god who makes you feel like you're not good enough.
Hmm.
Not in Homer's cosmology, the gods are capricious, the gods are mean, the gods want to pit humans against each other and make them do awful things or whatever. That's its own problem. And that probably is the problem that Plato had with what
Yeah,
Homer was
false
doing. And
theology.
certainly,
Yeah,
yeah. But like I feel like, and I'm certainly not the only one. And if you feel this way, we're not alone in our view of this. But like many of our kind of colleague commentators, like in the Catholic world anyway, have pointed out that it does really seem like at the end of the day, Athena is just a manifestation of Odysseus's guilt or a manifestation of his insecurity or his fear or something like that, right? It's not a power and a presence. It's not something like I mean, certainly not something like kind of the Holy Spirit, but neither is it something like the capricious gods of Homer. It's some
yeah,
kind
yeah. It
of
can even be a
strange,
demon. It can
yeah,
be
right,
something.
right. Because it
Yeah,
really doesn't seem to kind of do anything except kind of create some kind of introspection or something. Now, again, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but one last thing I'll say about this. The conversation partner that I had the other day, Father Augustine Weta, he really liked this. And I want to acknowledge this as a potential view that some of our listeners and viewers may have about this. That he said, look, in this day and age, in this kind of post-Christian reality, it makes more sense to show a kind of God who relates to man in a way that ultimately sort of draws our attention to man's inner life more than
mhm.
to some kind of external
Yeah.
experience that man is having. I get that, maybe. I'm just not so sure that Nolan really executed that as well as maybe he could have if he's really trying to make that point.
So it could be like a therapeutic idol of some kind.
Kind of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Okay.
she goes away. Because she
Yeah.
goes away in a sense when he kind of solves this problem, doesn't
It's like,
he?
yeah, it's like he finally left Calypso's couch, I mean,
Yeah.
which was interesting how, I mean, Calypso was depicted. What's interesting too is that the ambiguity of all of the women in the movie, there's really not much of an ambiguity there. Like in the Odyssey, Calypso is commanded by Zeus, to let go of, to let,
Yeah, and
Odysseus
she
go
wouldn't have
home.
done it otherwise. She's not.
Exactly.
I mean, in the movies, Charlize Theron's Calypso is present. And by the way, I thought Charlize Theron did a great job, and I thought I
Yeah.
actually sort of liked Nolan's adaptation of that part. But I think
Yeah.
to the point that the larger point that we're trying to make, it is interesting that she's presented as this sort of extremely sympathetic character, someone who yes, she got Odysseus hooked on the
On the
lotus
Lotus.
and
Yeah.
made him forget 7 years of his existence. But she had good intentions. I mean, he was in so much pain. And she really did think eventually he'd come out of it and he'd be ready to go. That is not what the way Homer depicts that, is it?
No, no, no. Yeah, also she's on like this lush island. I don't know what he was doing with the kind of like desert island that she's on. I mean, Charlize Theron is beautiful, so I could see why she's, like in a way this, this picture of immortality that Calypso is. But yeah, I was kind of wondering, let's talk about some of these choices too, because, instead of having, the island of the lotus eaters, she's giving, Odysseus the lotus to eat. I mean, he is munching that down.
Yeah.
So as opposed to like, what we mentioned earlier, Odysseus being immune to the temptation of the narcotic and forgetting his nostos, his homecoming. Um, he is just downing that stuff. So I mean like maybe I have to talk to more people and probably have a little bit more of a sympathetic reading and get what Nolan's trying to do as a modern adaptation. But I didn't really like this Odysseus.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think,
The best thing though was when yeah, I have to say, what I really did like him is when he finally shot the arrow
yeah.
through the axes, and then it's just all right,
I do think that
time for
Nolan,
the yeah,
yes, I think that he got the catharsis right at the end, finally. I do think
yes,
that if you stayed engaged throughout the entire film, the catharsis was quite good.
yeah,
And that I think we should give him credit for that. I think
yeah.
that generally the homecoming stuff was fairly well done. I know some people criticize that, his reaction to his dog, and I don't know, there were certain other elements of that people found dissatisfying. I thought it was quite
A
well
little
done.
wag of the tail. I mean, I thought that was really nice. I mean,
Yeah, I thought that was
yeah,
fairly good. Before we get all the way to the end, though, what did you think of Cersei? What did you think again, that? Because I think along with
yeah,
Calypso, those were to me to me the Cyclops, um, Calypso, Cersei, and then the kind of actual Trojan horse, uh, Trojan War stuff. Oh, and then one more scene, the engagement with the dead. I
yeah,
think those were kind of the major pieces of the movie that I thought were most interesting.
yeah,
But can we focus on Cersei for a minute? Because
yeah.
there's an example where I really loved Emily Watson's performance. I thought she was really excellent. I love that it wasn't, I love that,
Emily Watson? Is that the name of
yeah.
that? Okay,
Emily, oh gosh, is it Emily? I always get Emily Watson and Emily Mortimer mixed up. Which
okay.
Emily is it?
I,
Anyway,
I, I yeah,
anyway, I thought she was quite good in that. And I think that the
yeah.
way that it was filmed in terms of it wasn't some kind of cheesy animated thing to
I
show the men
know.
turning into the pigs. However, the way it was depicted is very, very different in terms of her character from what Homer was getting at. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you that part of the film was like the hardest to watch for me. I don't like horror flicks, and I felt like I was sitting through a horror flick in that, and some
Yeah.
other aspects of the film. I felt like the siren song
Yeah,
too.
it was a little bit of a body horror uh
Yeah,
thing. I agree.
but what was interesting with that, okay, no offense to the actress, I'm sorry, but like, I think if I'm getting this right, if I remember Cersei right, I mean, she is this beautiful, like witch that, I
Yeah.
mean, Odysseus sleeps with her. And
And has two children with her.
yeah, okay. And yeah, I didn't feel like that came through. I felt like also too, like her after Odysseus gets her to promise to turn his men back into men. The It's like she goes off on this rant about the men as being okay. I get it. Homer's probably saying something. Okay, they turned into pigs, but it's almost like the piggish behavior of all these men. I felt like it was kind of like a feminist rant.
Right. Well, so I mean, it really was inverting the original story
Yeah.
because she's the kind of prototypical temptress,
Hmm.
kind of dangerous temptress woman, right?
Yeah.
She turns the men into pigs and she seduces Odysseus and makes him her lover and gives birth to two of his children until I believe, correct me if I'm not sure. I believe the gods intervene to kind of force her to turn the pigs back into men and let them go.
Yeah.
Now, in the film, it's depicted as like, her viewpoint is the men naturally are pigs. And she's kind of doing
Yeah.
them a mercy. They don't really deserve to be men, but she's going to do them a mercy kind of out of the goodness of her heart and use her powers to bring them back.
Hmm.
Um, that to me, I don't know. I mean, I think
What was the
Christopher
thing too
Nolan,
about her sister being
it was the bird.
the bird? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
I mean,
understand that part. I have to admit. Maybe
okay.
people who know, maybe that's in Homer, and I don't remember. I don't
Okay.
know.
I
But yeah, I mean, I think Nolan. One more thing, and then you have other thoughts. But I think Nolan was just careful enough at the end that he understood. Look, I'm not going to be one of these just like crass, like you have heard it said, but I say kind of postmodern feminist filmmakers or something. Like he didn't want to just come right out and do that. He does make it seem like she was wrong to turn them into the pigs to
Mhm.
begin with, right? And and Odysseus is sort of firm with her about that. And we don't get a sense of judgment upon him that he's wrong to demand that she do justice to the men and turn them back. I think the statement is also made that certainly they've all done bad things, but that maybe they're not quite the monsters that she thinks they are.
Yeah.
Um,
I think, yeah,
so,
I
but I
take
do
that back.
think
I think
that
she
that's
does.
but that's a little bit of a kind of parenthesis at the end of what would otherwise be kind of I see what's going on here, kind of you know, just, the old, witches are just sweet, misunderstood women who happen to be a little more in tune with nature than other people are, kind of thing,
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
sometimes like, kind
I
of
know I
silly.
probably had that in the back of my mind and like a little bit of the depiction of it because it seems like, yeah, kind of like an earth goddess, but in today's like Wiccan sense. But the yeah, I thought that um that was an interesting part of the film. And then when he has to go into Hades after that,
Yeah, what did you think of that? Yeah, I want to hear your take on kind of his.
yeah,
I thought just from a cinematic standpoint, that was a very good scene.
yeah,
I didn't know how to feel about kind of what the nature of the interaction was, like what that really kind of meant for the journey that he's on. I admit I don't have a strong opinion about that, but I kind of feel like I should. What did you think?
yeah. I don't either. This was actually something I have to admit. This was partly because the film was coming out, and I skipped that part of him going into Hades. So I don't know exactly in
Well, at
Odyssey.
least in the film, the way that it's depicted, he doesn't go into Hades, but he's sort of
Yeah,
told to go to this sort of very remote place
place.
where
Yeah,
he can do this ritual and where the souls in Hades will kind of emerge and
yeah,
talk to him.
yeah.
And um, yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think I guess if I had to just like in a very scattershot way express what I thought it meant, I mean, it is this sort of reminder of the reality of war, that the sort of the um the cost of the foolishness that even a great hero like Odysseus makes. But then also, you mentioned before, kind of in the original text, the idea that even though Odysseus sees Hades, he will choose that as an eventuality rather than the kind of worldly immortality that Calypso offers him. And so I do think probably there's a little bit of that happening in the movie as well, that
Yeah.
Odysseus must make his peace with the fact that he will die too. Now,
Hmm.
it's not going to be as soon as his men on his ship. Unfortunately, none of them are going to make it home, and he will. But, he too will go down because, as we know, there was only one place to go when you died in
Yeah.
the ancient world, and it was to Hades or to Sheol, right? There was no kind of good place and bad place. There was just the one place. Though I suppose there was different people experienced it in different ways. I'm not an expert on the way Hades worked, but clearly the people that Odysseus is engaging with in Nolan's film are not having a good time wherever
Yeah.
they are.
Well, let's focus on the honor and shame part that you mentioned that the father really liked. The character of Robert Pattinson, what's his name? Oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the suitor. But
I'm
this thing
forgetting it
about,
too. The
yeah,
the main
honor and
suitor, yeah.
shame. But remember in the kind of the flashbacks where it's like when they're actually drawing lots for who's going to go to the Trojan War, then the Elliot Page, character. It was pretty funny that that actually happens, right? Like there were all these little memes going out about Elliot Page's role in the film, and it seems like, oh, all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, that's pretty close to what these X little,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a kind of like four-dimensional chess reading of that casting choice, but I mean,
yeah,
at the end of the day, I mean, clearly, yes. I mean, Robert Pattinson's character is guilty, and should bear the shame of essentially, rigging this lottery so that his brother, who is, I believe it's his brother, isn't it, or somebody else who lives in the town.
yeah.
I'm a
When
little mixed
he
up.
hands it off, and he doesn't want to shame the father. Odysseus doesn't want to shame the father
That's
for
it,
this,
right,
so it
right.
allows it to happen.
Right,
Uh,
allows someone who's clearly not fit to fight to go
yeah,
fight. Right. And naturally that person dies. And in some respects, it's Odysseus's fault that that person dies. But on the other hand, it's really Robert Pattinson's character's fault that that person dies
yeah.
because, that should have been him. He should have been the one who
Hmm.
represented his family at war and didn't. Um, Robert Pattinson's character then takes this abuse of the law of Zeus even further by essentially kind of like camping out in Odysseus's and Penelope's um, food hall
Yeah.
for years, essentially hoping that he can kind of usurp the throne and take over
Mhm.
as king of Ithaca. Now, I happen not to be much of a fan of Robert Pattinson, I have to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
The same
Um,
same here. But I kind of
yeah.
liked him in this role.
Well, he was very unlikable. So I suppose if
Yeah.
we're not supposed to like him and we didn't like him to begin with, then it was achieved. I mean, my goodness, he had a lot of screen time.
Yeah.
Seriously. Like I think, I haven't seen like kind of the breakdown of the percentages or something, but I mean, it really felt a lot of the time like the movie was kind of more about him than anyone else.
Yeah. You're right. I saw this chart of like what actors were paid and their screen time, and yeah, I forget where he fell in that. But yeah, he I think he played the part well. For yeah, and I wasn't expecting him. I didn't, never really liked him in any role before, but the whole when Odysseus shows up and shows the as the stranger, what is the little like um uh
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it just you have to,
yeah, how
show hospitality to strangers
yeah,
thing.
but
Yeah.
also
Oh, that they
also
may be gods.
reminder,
That they may be gods, right? Yeah,
yeah,
and that connects to kind
but
of the
also
the thing.
showing the little like where the when the drawing of lots what was given to him
Oh,
by
I'm
the
sorry.
Elliot
Yes.
Page character. Okay, now he
Yes, yes,
freaks
yes,
out
yes.
about that. Um but I mean I know we're kind of jumping around. We were talking about Hades here, but I want to talk too about Telemachus and his the portrayal of him. I have to say, like, eh, what's his name? Tom
Tom
Holland.
Holland.
Tom
Yeah.
Holland's. I kind of liked it
I
in the
thought he was pretty
beginning,
good.
but at
Yeah.
the end, and I wonder why Nolan did this. I have all these different ideas in my head. Maybe we can talk about these things.
Yeah, go for
Like
it.
when Odysseus slaughters the suitors, uh, he says, okay, I want to protect you, Telemachus, okay, because you'll eventually be king, and I don't want any of these, royal families to like hold a grudge and some vengeance against you. And he goes, but and so Telemachus then goes and fights that guy up in the kind of like weapons storeroom, okay, who's
Hmm.
trying to get the weapons down to the men as Odysseus is just picking them all off. Um, but Tel he's such a wimp. I
Yeah.
mean, the in the book, the at least Robert Fagel's interpretation in the text, uh, Telemachus is there with his dad, slaughtering them all.
Yeah.
And you didn't get that in this film. And
Yeah.
you feel
Okay.
like Penelope's comment to Telemachus early on about, you're just pretty much not a man. Really
Yeah.
kind of
That
rung true.
Yeah, okay. I was a little surprised about I think I call him Telemachus, Telemachus. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm never quite sure which one to say, but
you're probably
so
right.
I actually thought that his character, no, actually I noticed in the film that they said there were some characters said Telemachus and some said Telemachus, right
Okay.
in the movie. So I think
I
you can say it
remember
either
with
way,
these
but
Greek names, I asked a friend once because I was always getting these things wrong, and you always think Aristotle or Plato, but then where do
right.
you put the accent? Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
anyway,
ultimately, right. We're not speaking Greek, so it's fine. But but yeah, so I was actually a little surprised by that, by precisely what you just said, the way that he handles himself in the final battle, because the trajectory that it seemed like his character was on was, yes, that he was quite weak, and that
Mhm.
even his mother acknowledged that, and that there was no way that he was going to be able to be a worthy king of Ithaca, right?
Mhm.
Like his father. He hadn't gone off and fought in any battles. He had sort of stayed behind and cared, and kind of cared for his mother and basically waited tables for these bigger, brawnier men who are trying to move in on his mom, right?
Yeah.
So not very manly. But what does he do? He goes to Sparta and he visits Menelaus, where you see him hunting birds, and you see him, just prior to that, he had been working on his swordsmanship skills with John
Mentor.
Leguizamo's character, the shepherd keeper guy or whatever his name is.
Oh
I've
yeah, yeah,
forgotten.
yeah. And then with Mentor, and
Is he the
he was the
which one
big
is
kind
he?
of brawny guy. He was actually,
Right.
uh,
Okay.
yeah, that he went to Pylos with, and then went,
Right.
yeah. Anyways,
Right. That guy. Yeah, exactly. So it seemed like, and he goes in and he meets Menelaus, and Menelaus like is very manly and very, very tough. And, and he's I was a little confused about the nature of his relationship with Helen and stuff like that. That was a little strange. But not Helen. Yes, Helen.
Helen,
Yes,
yeah,
right. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting things mixed up. But so it's felt to me like the trajectory of Telemachus's character was going to be okay. When the moment comes, it is going to be exactly like you say. It's going to
yeah,
be shoulder to shoulder with his dad. We're gonna slaughter these bad guys and take our kingdom back. And it wasn't quite that. So it got me thinking,
yeah. Why?
why was he sort of prepared for that moment, but ultimately was kind of just throwing swords down, sort of just helping, not
Yeah.
really kind of
He
having
he
the
eventually
big
took
moment.
that guy out. I mean, but yeah, it
So
was,
he does
yeah,
something. Yeah, he does something, but it does definitely seem to be a little more just defensive, kind of, in the moment of decision, that kind of thing. Not like, kind of wheeling around the room with his bow and arrow like his father, kind of,
yeah.
getting one guy in the throat after another. So it got me thinking, and maybe this is premature to jump here, but I'll go ahead and do it, and you can backtrack to other things if you want to. But it got me thinking about the very end. And what happens at the very end, it's different than Homer's very end.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Odysseus gets home, but he doesn't stay at home. Instead, he and Penelope sail off into the sunset to some other place.
Was it say
Take a
the West?
cruise.
Yeah.
Retire to the West, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't, yeah, maybe we can read something into that or whatever. And explicitly in the dialogue, Nolan's dialogue says something like, this is the end of this civilization and another one is going to be born. This is, he even says, I mean, it was kind of cringy. I mean, embarrassing even, this is the end of the Bronze Age, everybody.
Yes.
On to the next one. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, it would be like, in a movie today, somebody saying, well, this is the end of the industrial age. On to the information age,
Yeah,
everyone,
right.
or something like that, right? It was a bit cringy,
Or you
but
could do like a McIntyre, the new dark age is upon us, or something like that.
yeah, except it seemed like what he was saying is it seemed more like what he was saying was we've been in a dark age.
Yeah,
And what's going to happen now is my son. So I mean there's a link, right? There's a link to the old world, but
yeah.
it's going to be my son who's going to be the king. And he's
He's
different.
yeah.
He doesn't
He
have
doesn't
all
have
of this
blood on his
murder.
hands.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he doesn't have all this blood on his hands like I do.
yeah.
And I have to feel like there's something Nolan is saying something. I mean, it's not even
That's
it's
interesting,
obvious.
Andrew. Yeah, I didn't think of that. I was thinking too, yeah, um that might have been part of it because right after what happens in the book is that all the families you basically take up arms, they're gonna really deal with them, and
Hmm.
then it takes the Zeus to come down and then declare the peace. But yeah, you're right. I like the kind of what's interesting is I've read this, I don't know, I forget where, but from the Iliad to the Odyssey, you have this movement from kind of Achilles and the gods. And what's interesting is like how the gods act through men there in the Iliad is very different than the gods and the relationship between the gods and men in the Odyssey. But it's almost like the man, the kind of that arises at the very end is Odysseus as if you want to just do universally, the man. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and then some people have the telling of Plato, which then Socrates is like the man. Okay. And then you get the Christians who say the God man, the um, but it's interesting too that maybe, yeah, what Nolan is doing here is like, okay, in this post-Odyssey Odyssean age, however you say his name, Telemachus, is going to be kind of, yeah, the land of those who do not have blood on their hands, who
Yeah.
in a way abide by the law of Zeus, who despite the mistreatment still serves. But I mean, which is interesting. Let's talk about this too, because like, all right, this whole thing in today's world, the context. I mean, because when the Iran was not war was not going on when Nolan was making this. But I think what was foremost in people's minds, at least in America, was a lot of stuff with ICE and with kind of the whole thing in the West about immigration.
Migration
That-
crisis in
yeah,
Europe
exactly.
and yeah, and
Yeah,
sort of
I
immigration being kind of a forefront political issue in the United States in a way that it hasn't been really in our lifetime, I don't
yeah.
think.
And do you think that like okay, so there's a number of ways you can go with this. You don't want to call them like this the CP. They keep talking about the sea people, right? And like in the kind of the history of that era, they talk about the end of the Bronze Age with kind of these the sea people arrive, and we know like the Egyptians dealt with them, and yet these other civilizations come to an end. We don't really know who they are, but they arrived, and they keep talking about that in the film.
Right. People are going to come from somewhere else and they're going to conquer us and they're
Yeah.
going to defeat
But
us.
then what does it say? Okay, I forget this line. Odysseus then realizes at the very end that they are like it's him.
He's the sea person.
Yes,
Right.
he's the sea person.
There's no enemy out there.
There.
It's only right here.
Yes.
Right? I think that is quite obvious in what Nolan is doing. I don't I don't in a way I find that kind of gross, but at the same time I do kind of I think like if you do have a kind of particular, political viewpoint that is not not in sympathy with the idea that there really is a danger that we need to kind of be looking out for. That's fine. And I think that what Nolan has done is not it's not like a sort of travesty that he kind of mapped that onto another story. I mean, I think he's always done that. I mean, if you remember The Dark Knight, I mean, there's something about The Dark Knight, certainly the kind of surveillance stuff at the end, which
Yeah.
is meant as a critique of kind of the Bush era
Yeah.
war on terror surveillance stuff, which is really funny nowadays because I mean, that seems so passé now. Like the idea that we would be anguished over some kind of like moral question of whether to turn cameras on all over our cities to find out who's doing bad stuff. I mean, now, gosh, like I wish we didn't have those cameras, but like
Yeah.
we totally take it for granted. That's just the way it works, right?
And then Dark
Um,
Knight Rises, is being also kind of a social commentary. Um,
yeah,
Maybe linking this up too to Oppenheimer, who's also the man of
totally.
technology,
Yeah, I
who
thought that.
has that anguish. I mean, people say that the ancient Oppenheimer is the Odysseus, and Odysseus is the man of means. He is the man of technology, of techne, and
Hmm.
yet he uses that for something like the Trojan horse.
Right. But and even before that, this came up in my interview with Father Weta that the bow was considered a kind of dishonorable weapon. I mean, sort of
Hmm,
like a gun in the sense that like it's a
interesting.
way to kill an enemy from distance, which is not the same. It doesn't have the same kind of like it doesn't require the same amount of courage
Yeah,
as fighting hand to hand
yeah,
with another man. So there's always that kind of with Odysseus. Um,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, and so that's and so like I guess like we need to be somewhat forgiving of Nolan in the sense that like he really is taking things that are there, even
yeah,
all the way back in the ancient epic, and he is using them in a way that speaks to the modern world today. I guess I just keep coming back to the idea that accepting post Christendom as where it is
hmm,
to me is just something that I can't accept. And so therefore then I think that there's a kind of message in what he's saying in making, Odysseus and Penelope sail off at the end, which is kind of undermining the whole idea of the Odyssey as kind of the or narrative of the West to begin with. Namely, what he's saying is there's no going back.
yeah,
There is no going back. Like you can't really like whatever home you Christians are kind of longing for. It's out there maybe for you, and that's
yeah.
cool. If it is, go
This,
find it. But here in the world now, we need Telemachus. We need a kind of a whole different thing. We need a kind of acknowledgement that everything that's led up to this point has hasn't worked,
yeah.
basically.
It's almost, yeah, it's like this kind of, yeah, this narrative of progress. You just don't look behind, which is interesting that they're using an ancient epic to tell that tale. Um
Yeah,
3,000, based on something 3,000 years ago. But it is interesting. Yeah, this kind of near, yeah, it's almost like the stepping stones to this and this point. Yeah, it's interesting with Nolan just how he ends a lot of these films. Like I'm thinking too that how he completed the Dark Knight trilogy. Um, there wasn't as much of a kind of ambiguity, you kind of there's like a noble sacrifice at the end, right? That has to take place in the Dark Knight Rises. And yet you still don't know, did it really happen?
yeah,
But yet it's an image that we all kind of like, resonate with. And then you could say maybe there's, pre-Christian, then, but obviously Christian, context there that makes us resonate with that. But here, with Nolan, it's interesting. I also thought it may be not going on the post-Christian stuff as much. It would be really interesting to see like Nolan's worldview, how that is kind of fleshed out. He seems pretty philosophical, even though this is like an very much an action film. I mean, he's generally brings in a pretty philosophical, um, you know, um, dimension to it. But
yeah.
also, what I thought was missing, and I just couldn't believe this wasn't there, was when he reunites with Penelope. And the two, that reunion. I mean, it seems to me
Hmm.
that's the whole point of reuniting in the marriage bed. And that scene about the marriage bed. I mean, the way it's described. as kind of being at the base at the kingdom, and also being it's unmovable, and that's where it's like the little olive. I mean, what is it? Yeah, it's like the little like fruitfulness that comes out of that, represented in Telemachus or Telemachus. That
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that too. Go ahead. I'm sorry, and
yeah,
then I
no,
want to
no, but
chime in on
like I
this.
remember like a couple of years ago, and maybe Patrick Deneen is the one who's talked about this before. It's interesting how for um, it begins the Iliad begins with marital infidelity. Okay, so a domestic crisis, and then it becomes this whole cosmic war, and then that war is resolved pretty much in the resolution of a domestic crisis.
That's right.
And so
That's
this
right.
And this is interesting, and I mean this is just the kind of these ways of thinking that we just don't do anymore. I mean we put like economics as like kind of this macroeconomics. It's going to understand the micro, and but we like flip everything the other way around. Um, and what's interesting to me is I was thinking constantly too. Once I read through the Odyssey, is JP2, a lot of people don't, not to go off on this, but a lot of people didn't understand why he focused so much on marriage and family as kind of the icon of this grand cosmic vision, which, but then it's like when you look at it in the Bible too, I mean, it's the wedding feast of the Lamb
Right.
that ultimately resolves this, cosmic disaster. Um, and
Right.
so, I mean, I think it's interesting that you don't have that resolution. I
Yeah,
mean,
and didn't you think even just from a kind of entertainment perspective that it was lacking? I mean,
yeah.
like wouldn't shouldn't there have been? I mean, I said before, and I reiterate that there was a great catharsis, I think, in that last battle when he strung the bow and he,
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
and
and
then
he
he's
shoots the arrow. That's
right.
great. But there wasn't a sense of like, like in a great love story, that sense of like he's got to get to her,
Yes,
and she's longing for him. And like there was no sense like
and
when
they're
reunited
two,
that it's like there's some magic, like it seems like at the very least, from an entertainment perspective, that should have been there in the
yeah,
movie. And then it would have also made the point somewhat that you think, and I think very rightly are pointing out is lacking, that really kind of undermines the whole ending. Again, yeah,
yeah.
infidelity is the start of the problem, the kind of reunion, restoration of a marriage at the end of it is what solves the problem ultimately, or it's like sort of
And
the
allows
natural endpoint
and allows Telemachus to become the man that he's called to be.
because he has
Uh,
his father back, and it's like the
and the
order is
reunion of mom
restored.
and dad. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like that's
yeah.
like the restoration that's needed. I like what Nolan did with Argos though, like a little those little scenes where they're, what's his name, the shepherd is discarding the little puppies, and
Uh-huh.
then he picks up and he's like, no, it's mine. The little relationship there, I like that,
That was nice. Yeah.
the recognition of Odysseus. But yeah, I felt like there needed to be more of a even the way that Penelope doesn't believe, I mean, I know you can't do
Hmm.
everything in 3 hours, and it was a long film,
Sure.
but like Penelope, when she hears from the nurse that Odysseus is back, and he slaughtered all
Hmm.
the suitors because she's sleeping during that, that she doesn't believe it. And then she questions, and then the anger of Odysseus at his wife. I think this is partially though too that like in today's world you just can't like Odysseus, the way he responds to some like Penelope and also sleeping with the women, uh,
Yeah.
and Penelope is faithful, whereas like Odysseus is just having grand old time with Calypso, even though
Well,
he's
he is,
sobbing
I
every day.
suppose. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Calypso part. I mean, the Circe part. Yeah, I suppose like one reading could be like, sometimes you just have to, you got to do what you got to do, kind of thing. And it just so happened that infidel. I mean, from a Christian perspective,
yeah,
obviously it's ludicrous, but like, in kind of the world of a hero like Odysseus, maybe it's just, he sort of forgives himself for those things because, well, that
yeah.
was required of me in the moment. But let's I think we've touched on so many important things, and if you have more, go ahead. But I wonder if we could sort of begin to wind down by thinking about what this film, kind of what this film will mean longer term.
Mm.
And let me make one other point before I share one thought about that and then get your thoughts. You were mentioning The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises and kind of the, similar but different ways that Nolan is kind of, exploring this idea of kind of the hero's sacrifice and kind of what this all means, like what it means as sort of a question to the culture and society and that sort of thing. I was thinking when I was watching the end of the Odyssey, I was actually thinking about the end of Dunkirk,
Mm.
which to me is a very beautiful scene. And I think Nolan is saying something slightly different in that scene than what he's saying at the end of the Odyssey. Do you remember the end of
You know,
Dunkirk? Do you
I was
know?
gonna say I've never seen the entirety of Dunkirk.
Okay, well
I never finished the film.
okay, well it's not an easy film to watch because for one thing, there are scenes where like the ships are being bombed and the sailors are underwater and stuff like that that are,
Yeah.
I mean, truly claustrophobic. I mean, wow. Like there are some really terrifying scenes in that movie that show kind of what a battle at sea would really be like,
Hmm.
which I think a lot of people just don't consider. Like what it would be like to be a sailor on a ship and to be facing the kind of, fire that the enemy has in that one. And then, then of course there's kind of this beautiful but also scary narrative in that movie about kind of all these little boats that, just amazingly, all the little heroes, right? All the little heroes of Britain say, come across the ocean and get the troops out. And I mean, it almost makes me choke up, honestly, like just thinking about the incredible, like the incredible bravery of that real historical moment that Nolan just captures so beautifully. I mean, Mark Rylance's character in that is
Yeah.
just a gorgeous character, like the kind of simplicity and humility of a man who just answers the call, like never thought it would happen to him, but like is able to do something, and it's just amazing, right? But let me just jump to the last scene, which is just amazing. So the very last scene, Tom Hardy is flying this plane. He's sort of like he's just I forget exactly what he's just done, but he's just saved some people. He's like, fought
Okay.
these other planes, right? Or whatever. But then he's approaching and he's out of gas. And he realizes that if he overshoots where he's supposed to land, he's going to end up in German arms, in German custody, because he'll be in occupied France then, right? But he sees there's one more. I'm going to get this wrong because I need to rewatch this ending again. But he sees that there's this one more plane that's going to hit this ship, this one ship full of sailors, and he realizes that he's going to have to overshoot so that he can get this plane so that it won't wipe out the ship full of this one last ship, right? Man, I'm getting choked up, honestly, like even remembering this. So like forgive me, audience. I have the spirit has given me the gift of tears and they're coming out. But anyway, here's the way it goes. I'll try and keep myself composed. So he saves them. He saves the ship, right? But he's got a coast now, and he's got kind of a long way to go. Like as long as he doesn't just like crash it. So he decides he's going to sort of try to take it as long as he can go. He's out of gas. Playing on the soundtrack is Hans Zimmer's reworking, kind of remix of Elgar's Enigma variations, the famous Nimrod variation
Mm.
that you would recognize if you heard it.
Yeah.
Beautiful kind of, written just before the British Empire, like effectively kind of ceased to be. And so it's playing as Tom Hardy is bringing his plane down. He brings it down and he sets it on fire so that the Nazis can't like take it. And then he puts his arms up and the German soldiers are holding him capped. And so the message is basically like he had to do this one more beautiful thing, to save basically it's kind of a metaphor for saving civilization. Like it's kind of a metaphor for everything that's about to happen in the rest of World War II. Like Britain had to sacrifice its empire. The West basically had to sacrifice its being a civilized people in order to kind of meet the force
Mhm.
of the brutality of Hitler or whatever, and the world would never be the same again. To me, it's like a beautiful elegy for the West. It is like it's sad because it really, to me, is Nolan sort of saying like, "Sorry guys, it's over." Like,
Mhm.
let's remember this one beautiful moment that we can
The
celebrate, you
sinking
know?
of the West. Yeah.
Yeah. But then I think he picks up that theme a little bit here in the Odyssey, kind of in a different way. Maybe arguably kind of from his perspective, a more hopeful way, because it's his way of sort of saying, hey, look, we had a we there were we had these moments of genius, but there were so many bad things too. So let's
Mhm.
just kind of focus on what could be, you know. So I get it. But I do think it's kind of a different message. And, you know, it's a little bit to me it has a little bit more of a barb in it uh with regard to the past than what he was saying, for example, in a movie like Dunkirk.
Well, okay, the fact that they those sail to the west. I mean
Yeah, you're
I
right.
don't want to like I know we're running out of time here, but going into the west, the symbolism of the west, it seems to me that like not just kind of the movement of the civilizations, like the sun going from the east to the west, but also there kind of being a sense of hope. Um, you think about I mean, just obviously we talked about America as the land of hope, and Odysseus is kind of very much an American figure. But how does it actually in the Arthurian legends, Avalon, okay, like,
Hmm.
and then the symbolism of the West. How does that?
Yeah.
I'm actually really this
Yeah,
is
I think that's right. I
taking
mean, I think you could even pick up, you know, Tolkien, you know, the idea of kind of the Grey Havens
and
and you
then
know
but
that
this
those who have kind
return.
of borne like those who have kind of borne the most extreme kind of pain of the struggle to save what is good can't keep living in the world that they've saved, you know, like they
Yeah.
have to kind of go on. Maybe there's a little bit of that there, and yes, the West as a symbol of hope, yeah, 100%. There's no doubt that Nolan is working
But
that.
perhaps maybe it's like your reading of Odysseus going set into the direction of the setting sun. It's like an age has come to a close, it's set, and the new one
Yeah.
will arise.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think let's flag really quickly the Americanness of this film.
Yeah,
The characters all use American accents.
yeah,
My kids were wondering, like, why are there so many British actors in this movie who aren't using their British
right.
accents? You know,
Yeah,
it seems like this kind of movie is ripe for everyone to at least attempt a British accent, you know, but no, Nolan went the opposite direction. He made it very American. There was a lot of, you know, a lot of furore, I suppose, about the fact that he favored this translation by what's her name?
yeah, Emily.
Emily something.
Yeah, Emily. What is it? Yeah.
We talked
I
about
was
this
gonna say
earlier, and now I'm
Emily
forgetting.
Watson,
It's
but
not, but it's Emily something. But you know, an American woman, you
yeah.
know, whose translation I think I haven't read it, but is you know thought to be somewhat
Is it
controversial. But I
Emily
mean,
Wilcox or no?
maybe something
Okay.
like that.
Yeah.
But it's very yeah, but very American, and I think like I think that's fitting. We are America is the empire, is the imperial power. I get it. Um, I felt, however, that, and maybe there's something deliberate about this, and again, this is some kind of four-dimensional chess or something, but I didn't like the dialogue for the most part at all in the movie. I thought it was
Yeah.
quite inelegant. It was not poetry, and it was um, not prose. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to put it. It didn't
There,
ring
I know
well
there's a
in the
choppiness
ear.
to it.
Yeah,
Bringing vengeance, bringing it all.
yeah.
That they kept replaying in the trailer.
I mean, even things like "Let's go," you know. I mean, even like little thing. I mean, it was like, wow. Again, I don't know, like like if Nolan is sort of sitting back and thinking like, I think that's bad and that's what I want. I don't know. I don't think he really operates like that. So I think he must have thought it sounded nice. I don't know, but I didn't love it, and I have to admit, you know, say what you want about that, but I also just thought. I don't know. I didn't love a lot of the people who were in that movie. I think some of them were quite good, not all. I generally like Matt Damon. I didn't have, you know, I didn't really like him as Odysseus too much personally, but. The bigger point that I would make, and I'll just say all this and then throw it back to you for a similar kind of recap. But I honestly felt at the end that I didn't hate it. I had all of these thoughts that we've been exploring today, which are generally, I would say, at least on my part, generally more negative than positive. I had all of those feelings, but I also didn't think it was a total waste of time. What I did think, however, was I would be very surprised if I ever watched this movie again. And I do kind of think that once this moment passes, once the wave breaks and it's not in the movie theaters anymore, and we've kind of moved past this moment where people are pretending to be Homer experts, us included, I suppose,
Yeah.
and make this comparison, I kind of think this movie is going to be forgotten, you know?
Yeah.
But I
I,
might be
I,
wrong. I may be wrong.
I saw somebody post that they're gonna go see the movie again, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna go see the movie again, but in some ways to, I don't know, discern whether or not my initial reaction was right.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe I'll watch
but
it one more time to do the same.
yeah, but I agree with you. I generally am like a Nolan fan. I remember the first time I saw his early films. I mean, but Batman Begins, I really kind of liked what he did with that. But for I know there were some Batman purists who did not like what he did with The Dark Knight, but I didn't leave with that same feeling after watching this. Maybe my expectations were too high, and I know you can't do everything with a 3 hour film, and also if you're trying to adapt for a modern audience. But my biggest fear a little bit is that people won't. I mean, a lot of people are saying, "Hey, this is good. It's going to force people to go back to Homer's Odyssey." But I really doubt that kind of. I don't think people are going to go sit down and look through it. But I'm a little concerned whether or not people are going to be like, well, this is Homer's Odyssey, you know?
Right. I mean,
Nothing
to
more to
your
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
to connect to the point you made just before, it's not like it's going to, I doubt very much it's going to spur a rethinking about whether universities ought to be closing all their classics departments, which is
Yeah.
what's happening, right? I mean, I think in some ways, like it might kind of prove that they're right to close them in a way,
Yeah.
in a strange way, because I think I keep coming back to this. I just kind of feel like the message ultimately is, look, like it's been fine. It's been good. It's been bad. Probably more bad than good. But
Move.
this is a movie. This is a movie adaptation of the ancient Ur narrative of Western civilization. And guys, it's time for a new civilization,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
which I feel resistant to that. I really do.
yeah. I'm trying to remember how Oppenheimer ends.
Well, let's
But
talk. Yeah, real quick. Like, say Oppenheimer, I gave that a pretty favorable review at the
yeah.
time, but I was reflecting on that. I don't think I'm going to watch that again. I think my son and I watched Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. We've watched those a few times together, and I really like both of those movies very much. I think both of those movies hold up really
Yeah.
nicely. And for me, it may be in part just how much better they are than anything from the MCU. Like if our movie industry has become superhero movies, well, I mean Nolan did it. He did it great. He did a great
Yeah.
job, at least
No,
with those first two. And he explores really important themes and there's great acting.
and I think there's
Um,
hope. I think there's hope that those
mhm.
movies end on. I mean, like you think
Yeah.
of the last film in The Dark Knight when he's in a way going, he's and Milbank has made a lot about this, is it's playing on the Republic, but he in a way he's always descending into Gotham, but then he kind of ascends. And once they say The
Yes.
Dark Knight, he in a way blends with the sun, which is like
Yeah.
the image of the good, and
Yeah.
the one who has truly passed the test, right?
Yeah.
I- and but then, and also with The Dark Knight Rises, so what you think about that? But in Oppenheimer, it's he's in the plane and we're all launching, you know, the the bomb at each other.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
mean, the end of Oppenheimer to
annihilation.
me is very bleak. I mean,
Yeah,
very bleak. Like, I
very
mean, to
bleak.
me, and this is
Yeah,
what I wrote. I thought it was a brilliant movie because, I mean, it ultimately is, you know, it's a reminder. It's very timely now with AI and stuff like this, but I mean, it really is just this reminder that man has created what man cannot control. There is just, and in the story of Oppenheimer is a tragedy. A
yeah,
brilliant man who has created our destruction.
Yeah.
I mean, and in that
The
sense,
new
it was a successful
Prometheus.
movie. Yeah, the new
Yeah.
Prometheus, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, and bingo, he did it. Nolan, you captured that in that movie.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, it's a big Hollywood movie. Part of my feeling, Bobby, about maybe I'm just exhausted with big Hollywood movies. The other night, my family and I, it was actually the night after we went to see we went to see the Odyssey. We were watching a Woody Allen movie from the 80s, and it's not one of his very best, but still a good one. And I was just sitting there just thinking, this is just perfect.
Yeah. I
It's
agree.
just it's a camera pointed at things I want to look at. It's very flawed people having an interesting conversation. I mean, what more could a person want from the cinema than something like that? Like, why? I just don't need something so big anymore.
Well,
And that just may be my problem. And I realize I'm going to keep going to these big movies because my kids like them. It's a special way that I can spend time with them, that my wife and I can spend time with our kids, and that we can stay connected to the culture. But at the same time, they don't do much for me. They really
well,
don't.
I mean, let's just really, I mean, sorry to end with something on the West, but maybe it's also a way of saying that, these you think of like the Odyssey and these retellings. I mean, not so much recently, but you think of like, Mike, what's his name? Kirk Douglas's Odyssey, these big, huge things of Hollywood, right? And these grand productions. And this is one of those films. But now in the age of AI, I mean, you have Elon Musk saying, "I'm going to make a more faithful AI version
Oh,
of
great.
the Odyssey." I know, but perhaps like this kind of the new age that's upon us. I mean, I'm just thinking out
Yeah.
loud right now is kind of a return to something like what you said with the Woody Allen. I mean, it's no longer that kind of you think about the Hollywood grand productions. That age is over. Okay, and so this might not be the new kind of new era of film that returns to something much more small
Maybe so,
scale.
because it does seem like Christopher Nolan, who I think, despite the fact that he's making these very big Hollywood movies, has tried to do so humanely.
Yeah,
He's famous for practical effects. He's famous for really shooting things and not just using green screens and stuff like that. But he's obviously the last of a dying breed.
yeah,
And so maybe maybe the Odyssey is something of a farewell to Mr. Nolan in a way.
maybe.
I do wonder what he could possibly do next. So we shall just have to wait and see. But on that note, Bobby, we are out of time. So any
Yeah.
final reflections before we sign off?
No, Andrew, it's just great talking about the film with you. I know you're a real cinephile when I talk to you about these things.
Oh,
So it's always
I don't
good.
know. I don't
Yeah.
know about that. I love stories, and that's why I just increasingly think, in this interview that I did with Father Weta the other day, he said something that I thought was very true. He said he believes that bad art is more harmful to the soul than bad theology.
Hmm.
And
That's right.
I actually think he's dead on about that. And so I do think
Six.
it's important to hold the great creators of our age to hold their feet to the fire. I think it's important to not just accept the mainstream thing, but to kind of look outside that and to kind of do our due diligence as people who care very much for our civilization and who are men of hope. Are we not, Bobby?
Oh, yeah. Last I checked.
We are indeed. So,
Cool.
all right, well, we'll wrap up there. Thank you all, our listeners and viewers, for sticking with us. If you've made it all the way to the end, I congratulate you and applaud your endurance. And also, just am touched because Bobby and I just love to share our thoughts with you. We love to share our writing with you. We love to share these conversations. We've been doing a number of these now where it's just the two of us talking. We're definitely going to have some great guests heading your way in the future. So please do stay tuned for those. In the meantime, if you want to ask us a question, leave us a comment on YouTube. We'd love to engage with you there. That really helps draw attention to the episodes that we share, and it brings us new followers. Check out our website, spacealvyinstitute.com. We've got a donate button there. We'd love for you to click on that and to show us your love financially. But if you're not in a position to do that, that's okay. We'd love for you to just go ahead and subscribe so you get our regular emails. And pretty soon, we're also going to have a newsletter, which is going to tell you about all kinds of other things that we have going on. So, For Bobby Mixa, I'm Andrew Petiprin, and until next time, may God bless you all and live in hope.